Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often.
Why are humans such a huge threat to the council, Professor? Asked Gaio, a Lahad student in the front row, his black and white fur partially hidden by his uniform. Is it because they're good at war? Professor Hiziri didn't reply immediately, though he considered the first question rather important. Perhaps the most important question any student could ask about interspecies relations in the current galactic climate. His reflective white scales were bright under the classroom's artificial lighting as he turned his head slightly, considering his response. The professor was a Kishan, a reptilian species known for their more scholarly pursuits than their physical prowess. His short snout gave him an almost draconic appearance. Though the comparison would have amused him, dragons, after all, were earth creatures, and he'd learned during his time there how many humans loved to imagine such beasts. Where most species had external ears, Hiziri possessed only small holes on either side of his head, nearly invisible beneath the scales. His eyes, a deep crimson that inspired an instinctive fear in many species, belied the truth of his kind. The Kishan were herbivores, their fearsome appearance a cosmic joke of evolution. He began to walk from side to side on the raised platform at the front of the lecture hall, his clawed feet creating a rhythmic tapping sound that echoed off the semicircular wall behind him. The acoustics of the room had been designed specifically for Kishan professors. Their species had discovered that certain sounds enhanced memory retention in students, and the architects had incorporated this knowledge into the university's construction. Each step seemed to punctuate the sentence that followed Gaio's question, building anticipation among the assembled students. "The humans," Hiziri began at last, "are indeed proficient at warfare. The few skirmishes they've engaged in with Council forces have often resulted in disproportionate losses from our side. During the Alpha Station incident, a single human military vessel disabled 3 Council patrol ships before diplomatic channels could be established. At the disputed mining rights conflict near Earth, human negotiators, backed by a mere squadron, held off an entire Council fleet simply through tactical positioning and psychological warfare." He paused in his pacing, turning to face the class fully. "However, if military prowess alone determined threat levels, the humans would barely register on our scale. Consider the Zodarian Empire. Before their integration into the Council, their biomechanical warriors conquered numerous systems in less than a decade. Their ability to interface directly with their warships, to become one with their weapons, made them nearly unstoppable. A single Zodarian dreadnought could devastate entire planetary defense grids." Several students shifted in their seats, some taking notes on their datapads. Hiziri continued, his tail swaying slightly as he warmed to his subject. Though if one looked closely, there was an unusual tension in the way it moved, as if holding back from a more agitated motion. "Or examine the Ivi warriors from Ziriar. Their natural ability to phase between dimensional states made them the perfect guerrilla fighters. During the Ziriar resistance, fewer than 1,000 Ivi warriors inflicted millions of casualties across Council worlds." He gestured with one clawed hand toward the star map displayed on the wall. "The Marine Collective's hive mind coordination allowed them to execute military strategies with perfect synchronization across light years of distance. The Gorvak's ability to survive in any environment, including the vacuum of space, made them impossible to contain or defeat through conventional means. The Terrellians' mastery of antimatter weaponry could reduce planets to cosmic dust." His red eyes swept across the classroom. Yet despite all these examples of superior military capability, despite species that could wage war on scales that would make human conflicts look like children's games, it is humanity that the Council has designated as the greatest potential threat to galactic stability. Hiziri stopped his pacing and simply stood there, waiting. He wanted to see if any of his students could piece together the puzzle, could understand why a species that was middling at best in terms of raw military power could inspire such concern among the Council's leadership. His tail curled slightly, a sign of amusement that most non-Kashan wouldn't recognize, though there was something else there too, a subtle tremor that spoke of memories best left undisturbed. The students exchanged looks of confusion. Some whispered to their neighbors, others frantically searched their datapads for information about humans that might provide a clue. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft sound of the climate control systems and the occasional rustle of fur, scales, or other integuments as students shifted uncomfortably. Finally, a hand rose, or rather, an appendage that served the same purpose. It belonged to Zetra, a sphere student whose transparent body revealed the constant flow of fluids through her internal systems. These sphere were a species of evolved aquatic creatures who had retained their translucent appearance even after developing the ability to survive in normal atmospheric conditions. Her features were gentle, almost ethereal, with large eyes that seemed to take in more light than they reflected.
"We couldn't possibly know the real reason,"
Zetra complained.
"The humans never joined the Galactic Council. The information available about them is fragmentary at best, mostly second-hand accounts from traders who've ventured into human space or diplomatic reports that are heavily redacted."
She paused, and just when both the professor and the other students thought she had finished speaking, Zetra added with a slightly harsh tone,
"Perhaps you should just tell us about your experience when you visited Earth, Professor, before the humans refused membership in the Council. Every student here knows you only teach this class because you have personal experience with humans."
Hiziri's tail went rigid for a moment, betraying his surprise. He had thought he'd been subtle about his past, mentioning it only when absolutely necessary. But as he looked around the classroom, seeing knowing nods and expectant faces, he realized that indeed every student present was somewhat aware of his history. In the age of information networks, keeping secrets was nearly impossible, especially in an academic setting where curious minds had access to vast databases. Memories of Earth flooded his mind all at once, the strange blue sky that had seemed so wrong after a lifetime under the purple heavens of Kashan, the chaotic beauty of human cities, the bewildering array of cultures packed onto a single world. He remembered the taste of Earth vegetation, remarkably compatible with Kashan biology, thankfully, the sound of human music, the feeling of rain on his scales. Some memories were pleasant, the warmth of human hospitality, the fascinating discussions with their scientists and philosophers. Others were disturbing, the undercurrents of violence in their entertainment, the casual way they discussed their history of warfare, the speed with which a friendly conversation could turn tense, or even predatorily romantic. He realized that trying to conduct the class in any other way would be futile now that Zetra had brought up his past. The students wanted, no, expected, to hear his first-hand account. "Very well," Hiziri said. "I will tell you about Earth and why the Council fears humans more than any other species we've encountered. But I must warn you, much of what I'm about to share is based on my personal experience and observations. It is not absolute truth, merely one Kashan's perspective on a species that defies easy categorization." The students nodded eagerly, leaning forward in anticipation. Several activated recording devices, though the lecture hall's systems would automatically capture everything for later review. With a mental command, through his neural interface, Hiziri activated the projection system. The wall behind him shimmered and displayed the first image, a group photo of the diplomatic team that had been sent to Earth. "This," he explained, gesturing to the image, "was the first official diplomatic mission to Earth, following standard protocol before formally inviting a species to join the Galactic Council." The image showed a diverse group of beings, a tall geyser with soft skin and horns over her head, a pair of Molian twins, whose shared consciousness allowed them to speak in perfect harmony, a gathering drone, a colonial organism that was merely an avatar for its species, and there, near the center, a younger version of Hiziri himself, his scales a brighter white than they were now, his posture revealing the nervousness he felt at the time. "Prior to our departure," Hiziri continued, beginning to pace again as the memories took hold, "there were extensive discussions about Earth's violent history. The humans had been under distant observation for several centuries. Their broadcasts and emissions had reached our monitoring stations long before we made direct contact. We knew about their world wars, their nuclear weapons, their tendency toward tribalism and conflict." He pulled up another image, a briefing room on the council station where the mission had originated. "I remember Ambassador Geyser," he pointed to the geyser in the photo, "expressing concern about the mission. 'We're walking into the den of predators,' she said, 'a species that developed nuclear weapons before they even achieved unified planetary government, who use weapons of mass destruction against their own kind.' But we were prepared for this," Hizir continued. "The Council had dealt with warrior species before. We had protocols, psychological profiles, containment strategies. The Molian twins, Ava and Ova, had spent cycles studying human military history. They could recite every major conflict, every tactical innovation, every weapon development. Our security detail included 2 Zodarian warriors. You can see them here at the edge of the frame. Look at this. Their armor was ridiculously large." He switched to another image, their ship approaching Earth. The blue marble hung in space, deceptively peaceful. "What we expected to find was typical warrior species behavior: aggression, dominance displays, immediate testing of our defensive capabilities. We had encountered this pattern dozens of times. The Gorvak had attacked our landing party within minutes of first contact. The Terrellians had insisted on combat trials before they would even speak with us. It was standard, predictable, manageable." The next image showed their landing, a carefully chosen site in what the humans called New York City. But from the moment we set foot on Earth's soil, everything was wrong. Not wrong in a dangerous way, at least not immediately. Wrong in a way that made every instinct scream that something was not as it appeared. He projected a video clip. Humans approaching the landing diplomatic vessel, smiling, waving, some holding welcome signs in multiple languages, including poorly translated attempts at Galactic Standard. They were greeting us with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. Not the calculated friendliness of a species trying to lower our guard, but something that seemed natural, innate, almost magnetic in its pull. "Look at their body language," Hiziri pointed out, freezing the frame. "Relaxed postures, genuine smiles. We had studied their facial expressions extensively. Open palms displayed in greeting. They brought their young ones, their children, to witness our arrival. What warrior species brings their offspring to meet unknown aliens?" A student in the 3rd row, a gelatinous blob whose surface vibrated with confusion, interjected.
"But perhaps it was a deception, a tactical ploy."
Hiziri's tail swayed, a gesture of negation. "That was our first thought, but as we spent time among them, as we observed their daily lives, toured their cities, participated in their cultural events, the friendliness never wavered. It wasn't a mask they put on for visitors. It was woven into the very fabric of their society." He showed a series of images, the diplomatic team at various Earth locations. "Here we are at what they call a farmer's market. Humans gathering to exchange food and crafts, engaging in commerce but also social bonding. Notice how they interact. Touches, embraces, shared laughter. They form emotional connections with strangers over the purchase of vegetables. Even then, I noticed how comfortable it felt, how natural their warmth seemed, despite our different biologies. Another image. This is from our visit to a human educational institution, a place where they train their young. The students were fascinated by us, yes, but also immediately concerned for our comfort. Were we too hot, too cold? Did we need special accommodations? One young human spent an entire day trying to learn enough Kishan to welcome me in my own language. The dedication was unusually intense.
So they were peaceful?
Asked Drix, a four-armed Penthan near the window.
How is that threatening?
Patience, Hiziri said. Understanding the human paradox requires context. They were not peaceful. They were peaceful and warlike, existing in a state that was rather uncommon. During our stay, we witnessed them consume entertainment that glorified violence. What they call action movies, where conflict resolution through force is celebrated. The same humans who had welcomed us with such warmth would gather to watch simulated battles with great enthusiasm. He displayed a split image. On one side, humans helping to adjust the environmental controls in the Molian twins' quarters to make them more comfortable. On the other, those same humans cheering at what they called a boxing match, ritualized combat for entertainment. But the true revelation came when we attended a historical museum. The humans were eager to share their history with us, including their darkest moments. They spoke of their wars not with pride, exactly, but with a strange mixture of horror and fascination. They had preserved the weapons, the documents, the testimonies. They studied their own capacity for violence with the same intensity they studied art or science. A new image appeared, the diplomatic team standing before a wall displaying human military history. I asked our guide, a professor of human history, how they reconciled their peaceful nature with their violent past. She looked at me with surprise and said, "But we're not peaceful by nature. We choose to be peaceful, and sometimes we succeed." The classroom was silent now. Every student focused intently on their professor's words. That night, in our secured quarters, Ambassador Geysar initiated an emergency meeting. "They're predators," she insisted, "but they've learned to suppress it, to control it, to channel it." The Zodarian warriors were deeply unsettled. One of them said it was like watching a weapon that had learned to think for itself. But even then, some of us felt drawn to return to our human hosts. The pull was subtle, but undeniable. Hiziri paused, letting the implication sink in. The Council's initial assessment was that humans represented a unique integration challenge, a warrior species that could blend seamlessly among the peaceful. They didn't simply control their violent impulses, they had built an entire civilization on the principle of choosing cooperation over conflict, while never losing the capacity for violence.
"Is that why they're considered the biggest threat?"
Zetra asked, her form pulsing with curiosity. Hiziri's tail swayed again. Another negation. No. At that point, the Council was still planning to extend an invitation. The prevailing thought was that humans could be integrated with proper precautions. Warning protocols were drafted for all member species. Guidelines for recognizing human stress indicators, understanding their dual nature, avoiding triggers that might activate their warrior instincts. He projected a document, pages and pages of analyses and recommendations. The Integration Committee spent many resources developing frameworks for humanity's inclusion, special trade regulations to account for their unpredictable economy, military exchange programs that could channel their strategic thinking productively, cultural exchange limits to prevent their more violent entertainment from spreading to impressionable species. The preparations were extensive, he continued. We thought we understood them, a warrior species that had evolved beyond constant warfare, that had learned to mimic, to genuinely embrace peaceful coexistence. Unusual, certainly, requiring careful management, absolutely, but not unprecedented. The Yorathi had undergone a similar transition millennia ago, though theirs was artificially induced through genetic modification. The students were leaning forward now, sensing that the real revelation was coming. "So, what changed?" asked Gaio, his fur bristling with anticipation. "What happened during the rest of your visit?" Hiziri let out a long breath, a sound like wind through scales. Everything changed. The diplomatic mission that was supposed to last 10 Earth days extended to 30. What started as a formal first contact became something else entirely. Something that made every member of the team question everything we thought we knew about classification of species, about the nature of consciousness, about the very foundations of galactic civilization. He looked around the room, meeting each student's gaze. "You think you understand why humans are considered dangerous because they're warriors who can pretend to be peaceful? That's not even the beginning. That's the comforting lie we told ourselves before we truly understood what humanity represents." "Then what is the truth?" Zetra whispered. Hiziri laughed, a sound like grinding stone that his students had rarely heard from him. "The truth? The truth is that during those 30 days on Earth, we discovered something that the Council had been trying to suppress, classify, and contain ever since. Something that makes their warrior nature seem trivial by comparison." Hiziri stood before his students, his red eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made several of them shift uncomfortably in their seats. The silence that had fallen after his last statement stretched on for several heartbeats before he spoke again. "Since we are all respectful and well-educated adults here," he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone than they had heard before, "I will tell you the uncensored truth, the full account of what transpired during our extended stay on Earth, without the diplomatic sanitization or the Council's official version of events." Several students exchanged glances. The sphere, Zetra, shifted in her seat, while Gaio's fur stood slightly on end. They had come to class expecting a standard lecture on interspecies relations, not whatever this was becoming. "During that first month on Earth," Hiziri continued, resuming his pacing, "something strange began to happen to the diplomatic team. It was subtle at first, so subtle that none of us recognized it for what it was. We became distracted. Not in the way one might be distracted by new sights or experiences, but in a deeper, more fundamental way." He paused, his tail curling in what his students now recognized as discomfort. "When we finally realized what was happening, during one of our mandatory team meetings, we discovered that humans possessed a characteristic we had found in no other species before. They could genuinely bond with anything, and I do not use the word genuinely lightly." A four-armed student near the back raised one appendage.
"Professor, many species form social bonds. The gathering literally exists as bonded individuals, and the Molian twins—"
"No," Hiziri interrupted, his voice sharp. "You misunderstand. I'm not talking about the calculated alliances based on mutual benefit that most species engage in. Not the biological imperatives like the gathering's collective consciousness or the Molians' shared existence. I'm talking about something different. The spontaneous emergence of real, true bonds of friendship that transcended species, culture, biology, and even logic." The classroom erupted in confused murmurs. Relian, her scales shifting to a puzzled orange, spoke up.
But, Professor, how is that a bad thing? If humans can form genuine friendships easily, wouldn't that make them ideal council members? How does that make them a threat?
Hiziri's laugh was harsh, almost bitter.
That's exactly what we thought too. Oh, how naive we were.
He gestured to the wall, bringing up a new series of images.
Look at these photos from month 2 of our stay. See how the ambassadors are smiling, how relaxed everyone appears. We were fascinated by this human characteristic. Ambassador Geisar wrote lengthy reports about the unprecedented opportunity for true interspecies understanding. The Molian twins were ecstatic. They had found humans who could almost intuit their dual nature without explanation.
He switched to another image, a formal document.
The mission was extended to 6 months. The Council approved the request immediately, even sending additional scientists and cultural specialists. We thought we were witnessing the key to a new era of galactic unity.
The students looked even more confused now. Drix leaned forward, his forearms gesturing expressively.
I don't understand where this story is going, Professor. If the humans were so good at making friends...
Hiziri's laugh cut him off again, but this time it held something else. Embarrassment? Regret? The professor touched his neural interface, and a new image appeared on the wall. The collective gasp from the students was audible. The image showed a Brida female, her sleek black fur groomed to perfection, feline features marked by large green eyes and pointed ears. She was beautiful by most species' standards, elegant and poised in her diplomatic attire.
"This," Hiziri said softly, "is Iliara, one of our cultural specialists. The humans, in their curious way, described Brida as cat people, a reference to one of their domestic companions. Iliara was brilliant, dedicated, with a career spanning 10 years. She was also the first galactic citizen to fall prey to humanity's most dangerous characteristic." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "You see, we discovered that human bonding could go beyond mere psychological ties. In what seemed like the snap of a finger, it could become physical."
The silence in the room was deafening. Several students looked shocked, others confused, and a few seemed to be processing the implications.
"Are you saying,"
Zetra began, her translucent form flickering with distress.
"I am not hesitating to use the words taboo and interspecies relationship," Hiziri stated bluntly. "Iliara was discovered in what we shall call a compromising position with a human male she had been working closely with. The shock that ran through the council team was profound. Everyone pointed fingers, at Iliara for her lapse in judgment, at the human for taking advantage, at the security protocols that had failed to prevent such a thing." "But surely," Gaio interjected, his fur bristling with discomfort, "this was just an isolated incident, the fault of 2 individuals making poor choices?" "That's what we told ourselves," Hiziri replied, "for exactly 3 days, until the Molian twins were discovered with human twins in a situation I will not, cannot, describe in detail. Let us simply say that the compatibility was more extensive than anyone had imagined possible."
The shock rippling through the classroom was more than clear. Several students had stopped taking notes entirely, staring at their professor with expressions ranging from disbelief to horror.
"What kind of tendency are we talking about here?"
asked a brave student from the middle row. Hiziri's tail lashed once, a sign of extreme agitation.
"Over the following weeks, more such incidents came to light. A Zodarian warrior, despite all their conditioning, was found in a human's quarters, their biomechanical armor discarded.
One of the gathering's component individuals had somehow separated itself from the collective to pursue a relationship with a human artist. Even species we considered psychologically incompatible with such behavior were affected. He brought up a chart showing incident reports. At first, we blamed the individuals, a few bad actors lacking proper discipline. Then we blamed certain species. Perhaps the brida and similar mammals were more susceptible. But after another month of investigation, the council team realized something terrifying. The professor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Human culture itself was not just accepting of these practices, it actively encouraged them. Their media, their literature, their very social structures were built around the idea that attraction and connection could transcend most boundaries. He pulled up a video clip, a human official speaking at what appeared to be a press conference. When questioned about these incidents by Ambassador Geyser, the human leadership's response was shocking. They simply stated that the behavior of individuals in their private time was none of their business. They had a saying, "Everything is fair game behind closed doors," or something to that effect. As long as all parties were consenting adults, they saw no issue.
But how is this worse than humanity being a warrior species?
Drix demanded, his forearms crossed in confusion.
So they have different social norms. Many species do. Why is humanity's unusual love life such a threat?
Hiziri stood still, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the classroom walls. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. "Because," he said slowly, "humans aren't just compatible with most species, though that alone would be concerning enough. The real threat is that they're addictive, both in personality and physically." The class fell into absolute silence. Not even the climate control system seemed to make noise.
"Addictive?"
Zetra whispered. Hiziri's scales seemed to dull, as if the memory itself drained the light from them. "I experienced this phenomenon personally." He moved to the side of the platform, no longer able to meet his students' eyes. "There was a human woman assigned as my cultural liaison, Dr. Ellie. Brilliant, warm, with what humans called a wicked sense of humor. At first, our interactions were purely professional. She helped me understand human idioms, navigate their social structures, explained their art and music." His voice grew softer. "But humans have a way of breaking down walls you didn't even know you had built. It started with casual conversations over meals. She would ask about Kashan poetry, then surprise me by attempting to write some in my language. She learned to prepare vegetables in ways that reminded me of home. Small gestures, nothing inappropriate." The professor's tail curled tightly against his body. "She would comment on the beauty of my scales, how the patterns were like living pearls. Humans have a gift for making you feel seen in ways you've never experienced. Every interaction left me wanting more. She would touch my tail in greeting, a gesture that meant nothing to humans but was deeply personal to Kashan. Yet I found myself allowing it, even looking forward to it." He finally looked back at his students, shame evident in every line of his body. "Within 6 months, I was compromised. Not in the physical way that Iliara was, but emotionally. Psychologically. I found myself making excuses to spend time with her, sharing personal details no Kashan would share with an outsider. I began to reciprocate her gestures, learning human dances, attempting their humor, even considering their philosophical concepts about love and connection. When the council summoned everyone back and declared Earth forbidden territory, I was one of the few ambassadors who overcame my addiction and returned, but it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Leaving felt like tearing away a part of myself. Ellie stood at the spaceport, crying. Humans leak saline when emotionally distressed, and I nearly turned back. Nearly threw away years of life and career for 6 months of connection with a human. He straightened, trying to regain his professorial composure. I realized later that I had fallen victim to a love predator. Not intentionally. I don't believe Ellie meant to ensnare me. It's simply what humans are. They cannot help but form these bonds, cannot help but draw others into their emotional gravity.
But, Professor,
A student asked hesitantly.
how does individual romantic entanglement threaten the entire council?
Hiziri pulled up a final document, heavily redacted but still showing alarming statistics. Because of the 47 scientists and diplomats who spent those 6 months on Earth, only 5 returned when recalled. The others chose to stay, abandoning careers, abandoning their species, abandoning everything for their human connections. The willingness of trained, professional, dedicated individuals to throw away their entire lives after just months of exposure set off every alarm in the council hierarchy. He gestured to the redacted sections. The Council's Xenopsychology Division ran models. If humans were integrated into galactic society, within a generation, they projected massive social disruption. Within 5 generations, fundamental changes to the structure of multiple species' societies. Within 10, the complete breakdown of established species boundaries. The humans were classified as an addictive species, dangerous to the psychological and social health of council species. Preparations were made for a special law forbidding humans from being in the same physical space as other species without extensive protective protocols. Trade would be conducted through automated systems, diplomatic contact through remote communication only. He deactivated the display. But then, in what might be the most human action of all, they declined membership. Politely, diplomatically, but firmly. They thanked us for the offer, but stated they needed more time to get their house in order before joining a galactic community. The relief in the council chambers was as clear as day. The class remained silent for a long moment before a young Tyrellian raised her hand.
Professor, don't you think you're being overly dramatic? Perhaps you simply fell in love. It happens, even between species sometimes. Why make humans out to be some kind of drug?
Other students nodded, and Hiziri could see the judgment in their eyes. To them, he was just an old academic who had been foolish enough to develop feelings for an alien and was now trying to justify his weakness by demonizing an entire species.
Maybe
Another student added.
the problem isn't the humans are addictive, but that some individuals lack proper emotional discipline. After all, you did leave, didn't you? So it couldn't have been that powerful.
The criticism stung, but Hiziri had expected it. Perhaps you're right, he said quietly. Perhaps I'm just a foolish old reptile trying to rationalize my own weakness. But consider this. The Council has faced species that could destroy planets, that could rewrite reality, that could kill with a thought. Yet none of them were classified as an existential threat to galactic civilization itself. Only humans hold that distinction. Ask yourself, why? The bell chimed, signaling the end of class. Students began gathering their materials, many shooting questioning looks at their professor. Some whispered among themselves, clearly discussing what they had heard. The judgment in their eyes was clear. They saw him as compromised, his academic credibility tainted by personal involvement. As the last student filed out, Hiziri found himself alone in the empty classroom. The silence pressed in on him, bringing with it memories he usually kept carefully locked away. Dr. Ellie's laugh, the way she would tilt her head when thinking, her hand on his tail, so gentle, so natural, as if the boundary between human and Kashan meant nothing at all. He moved to the window, looking out at the purple sky. Somewhere, dozens of light years away, Earth continued its rotation around its yellow sun. Ellie, if she was still alive, humans lived such short lives, might be looking up at her blue sky right now. Had he done the right thing in returning? The question haunted him every day. His colleagues, who stayed, would send occasional messages through traders, brief glimpses of lives transformed beyond recognition. They spoke of fulfillment, of connections deeper than anything they'd known before. The council called it proof of addiction, but in his quiet moments, Hiziri wondered if, perhaps, they had simply found something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to feel, or had never truly known at all.